didn't shave today. Is that a problem?
Uh-uh.
Good.
Okay, so 3, 2, 1, whenever you want to go.
Hello, my name is Doug Patterson. This is my second in a series of discussions that I like to have, dialogues, Doug dialogues, about really critical issues facing the United States and the world, but certainly facing the left. I've been a proud member of the left for over 50 years, and we certainly haven't achieved all that we wanted to. It is my thought that perhaps if I shared some thoughts that I've picked up in the last 50 years, it might be helpful. For those who saw the initial installment, I wanted to talk about civilization, and I think the problem with civilization, which is that it is the place where we first see, in the transition from the tribal world, the tribal community, to the urban community, a transition from a sort of a shared economy, a shared social life, because it was small, it was intimate, to a more competitive and difficult urban environment that I assign the responsibility of generating supremacy. That when you have a number of people, instead of you having a tribe of 1,500, 2,000, maybe 3,000, which would be large, working and living together, and you have a town of 10,000, it's becoming a situation in which those who have power or can generate power can establish their power through a kind of claim of supremacy. We do know this happened fairly universally as the tribal community was overcome, dismantled, and was absorbed into the urban community in the presence of patriarchy. Many of the tribes that were present on the earth for 40 or 50,000 years were matriarchal. They traced their origins and their power to women, which didn't mean that men were left out. It was just that was what they felt was the seed of their strength and their guidance and their moral force. But when we get to the period of about 6,000 years ago, 4,000 years before the Common Era, in the emerging city-state empires of Sumeria, we have patriarchy. And to a certain extent, it's because a lot of men in a city of 10,000 or so could lay claim to the fact that they were superior and they had muscles, they knew how to do things, and patriarchy becomes the dominant form of gender rule from then until now. And so it was because of the urbanization of the human social fabric, of the human community, that this was able to happen. But as I said last time, what also happened was the emergence of class. That those, certainly in the case of men, an ability to claim a certain economic privilege and power, dominance over women, their family is more important than other families, dominance over resources, dominance over the rural areas. The class began to emerge as a real force in human history. Nowhere near as great as Marx and Lenin will attribute to it in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. But we do see class, I think, at this time emerging as a very important force. We also see the emergence of cultural supremacy, religious supremacy, and these things being enforced by military strength, armed forces, which would be controlled in such a way as to support those privileged sectors of society. And the result is that we have in civilization, and this is a strong sort of observation, but I want to put it out there, the first appearance of fascism. I'd say there are numerous levels of fascism, but it's in these early urban states that we get a sense of supremacy that is put in place through force and violence. and then maintained through force and violence, which is my definition of fascism. And that it isn't, a 20th century phenomenon, that it's been part of human development and human sociological relationships for 6,000 years. It's pretty difficult to look at Rome, very male-dominated, military-dominated, class-privileged, Caesar-dominated, and not be able to say that there's something going on in the way of supremacy. And that supremacy relies very strongly on force and violence to build it and then to maintain it over 3 or 4 or 5 centuries. So this is the early stages of my commentary, and where I want to sort of pick up today is that where I think we also see emerging, because we're getting class, is the state. And this, of course, is a topic that Marx was particularly focused on, as was Lenin, as was Mao, as any good, leftist revolutionary, is what is the state for? And the argument is made, and I think it's true, that the state is used by the privileged classes and genders, cultures, religions, as a way of being able to protect, either violently or through negotiation, the privileges of the dominant classes. So I'm going to suggest that what we have emerging at this time is the state. Now, current dialogues on this subject would suggest a sort of a dialect of is it the nation or the nation state come first, the nation state or the nation? And I would say that doesn't really catch the whole question. Even the question of the city-state, because we sort of officially in our Western histories talk about the city-state that we've got pretty well established, certainly by Greece and Rome, and probably by Egypt, and by some of the developments in the Middle East. We've got city-states. So then I ask, well, when did the state come out? When we didn't just have a city-state, we have a state. And I would say we have a state when we see the emergence of towns and cities as the central organizing force. Because one of the things we find out really early on in civilization is a considerable increase in just plain flat-out violent war. Violent war between cities, between interests, regional areas, making alliances. And these wars, these aren't small wars. A lot of people are killed, 100,000, 200,000, some cases a million. Many people are killed in these struggles. So the military presence in a city or a city-state or in a region is very important, and for that you need a state. You need a dominating force within the population to be able to raise an army, to feed an army, to weaponize an army, to determine what we're going to do with the wife and the children. I don't mean to be flip about that. I am particularly appalled at the extent to which patriarchy has created a permanent set of violent and oppressive values for men over women, and that has to be overcome. In fact, I would say as a sidebar here that as long as women are perceived as objects of sex and sexual encounter, and that's their primary identification, and men are seen as sites of violence and violence encounter, we're probably not going anywhere. That has to be changed. And of course, it'll be changed, I think, with some real revolutionary actions. But we're not there yet. So I would say here that the state is necessary to be able to negotiate and to administer matters of war and food production and whatever 6,000, 5,000, 4,000 years ago. I'd also like to observe that the first appearance of enslavement on a large scale, notice I'm saying enslavement and not slavery, because I don't want to call people slaves. They are enslaved. We have the appearance of enslavement with civilization. Comes at the same time, almost exactly. And not that there wasn't in tribal cultures some evidence of enslavement, but we begin to have the industrial development of enslavement with civilization. Well, what does that say about civilization? Maybe it wasn't all that civil. I'm not trying to just be totalizing my critique of civilization. I think that wouldn't be useful, and besides, I don't think it's true. I mean, civilization has probably generated some useful elements for the large scale population of humanity. It could be a lot more if we acknowledged some of what civilization has built and how it continues to reconstruct itself in even current day history of systems of oppression that include enslavement and various forms of enslavement. Let's give tribute to the bourgeoisie for that. They can certainly figure out ways to make money through enslavement and make it look good. So these qualities of a culture of enslavement and of the state, and the state here having to, of course, administer enslavement, being involved in getting enslavement orchestrated and managed, are features of civilization that are not something that we should be happy about or proud about. I'd also like to say that one of the words is used for the developments that happen as we move from tribal cultures, hunter-gatherer cultures, into urban cultures. Is the Neolithic. That's a big word is used. It's a Neolithic activity going from the Stone Age to sort of pre-civilization. And what is intriguing about the Neolithic development, if we're talking about the state, is that this period of time from 10,000 years before the Common Era until 6,000 years before the Common Era, and we begin to get civilization, is marked by all kinds of activity that it is really difficult not to call it that it is from the state. I have a passage I'd like to just sort of pass on to you about that. Here's an observation about the Neolithic period. It provided the basis for centralized administration and political structures, hierarchical ideologies, depersonalized systems of knowledge, such as writing, densely populated settlements, specialization and division of labor, more trade, the development, I like this, the development of non-portal art and architecture, which my wife Margie liked that framing very much, and greater property ownership. And my reply to that is, and this is coming from 10,000 to 6,000 before the Common Era, geez, could somebody call it a state? What is emerging here is various forms of management of the layers and divisions of society that is being managed by people who've got a lot of privilege and a lot of power and a lot of violence. And even though we call it the Neolithic period, we'd be in error to see it as a period of sort of backwardness, or people just crawling out of their caves and beating a stick. This is a period of considerable human development in many ways, but it is also the emergence of all the elements necessary for the state. Of course, Marx and Engels couldn't have gotten back to this. Western, research or whatever has been fairly prolific in being able to put together various structures of awareness and knowledge of deep history, and even this isn't deep history, because the deep history really gets into both human habitation 50,000 years ago, and before that the transition from primate life to human life over 4 or 5 million years, That's deep history too. But the deep history we're talking about here is that the 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 emergence from the Stone Age and late Stone Age into pre-civilization is a complex period that we have to acknowledge and be aware of. That the state was being created, and by the time we get to Babylon, and by the time we get to Jericho, by the time we get to certainly Egypt, and the Egyptian civilization, there's a state. There is a very strong system of control over a highly divided society. So therefore, my contention here is that when we talk about state and revolution, we're talking about a form of human organizing that has been with us for a long, long time. And I think it would do us well to understand that, and that the implementation of new forms of state oppression, which is what basically the state stands for. State means the fact that it's going to be oppression. That we need to put our theory into encompassing a wider period of human history, and why we're having so much trouble right now, being able to transition from this highly destructive and in fact planet-threatening form of organizing into something that gets to sharing. I'm not calling for the rebirth of hunter-gatherer societies. It may happen anyway. I wouldn't advance that, but I think we have to be aware of the way in which divisions between humans have been enforced for such a long time. So the next stage of my analysis today is going to go to the notion of coercion. One of the people in my life who's been very, very effective and very influential is Auguste Boal. People in theater would perhaps know of him. He developed a form of theater called the theater of the oppressed. And his observation was, and I'd like to talk about this in some later editions, but his analysis was that when we get the emergence in Greece, which means, forms of the state and oppression and slavery have been around and patriarchy have been around for a long time. When we get theater, we sort of dismantle the system of storytelling, of oral storytelling, and we put on the stage a very powerful force to be able to tell the community stories using bells and whistles and music and acting and powerful structures of architecture, of theaters and whatever. And Boal says what he thinks happens in Greece with the emergence of Greek theater and the disappearance, in a sense, really, of storytellers and epic poets like Homer, who didn't exist, but the epic poets who were involved in that. What we get is coercion. The stage itself is a site of coercion, and it uses the weapons of a script and performance and, as Aristotle said, pity and fear to make its tragic sort of imprint on people. That's not new. That's not new with Greece. Coercion as a form of social organizing, I think, comes in that at the Neolithic period, at the end of that, and then with civilization. So what I've been interested in doing is sort of developing an analysis of coercion. What are all those words that we use to sort of gradate our influence on people? For example, we might start with dialogue. Maybe there's dialogue with people, which is really good, and caring for people, and negotiating with people. Maybe these are kind of some good things that have to do with persuasion, trying to persuade people. But at some point, for whatever reason, those efforts at persuading people or trying to convince people of an argument gets into some elements of force and some elements of threat. Certainly we've seen that with one of our recent presidents in the United States. and that so therefore the element of sort of just sort of open discussion and healthy debate kind of disappears in the favor of winning the argument regardless. And this is the problem of supremacy. Because once supremacy has entered a culture, and I suggest it's been around for a very, very long time, then what's important is to protect the supremacy. Not to protect a truth or whatever, but to protect the supremacy. And from early on, from civilization on, there are implements of dominance that have to do with coercion and threat and killing in order to preserve the supremacy of the dominant class. And again, this is one of the functions of the state. This is what the state can do. Unfortunately, it also filters down to the citizenry. And particularly when you get a culture such as ours, which the bourgeoisie established and began to establish, have been establishing for centuries, but began to really officially establish in the middle of the 18th century, is competition. The competition is going to be the thing that is going to save, humanity, because it allows people to, the best will survive and the best products will be made, and women will find a place. So that this notion of competition becomes intrinsic to our current life and has been in the human family for so long. What is a gladiator contest, if not a competition of the most violent and forceful kind, and people being led over their upbringings and over decades to cheer for the competition and for people to win and to kill. So the notion of competition that I see on television, the good competition and how to be able to make a good company and how to get a good CEO, having good competition. I mean, we need to examine this very carefully, because it's not just a part of the force that's there structurally. And people talk about, structural racism and structural misogyny and, structural privilege for the rule of the rich. This goes down to our daily lives. And I think we end up, even unconsciously, competing against each other. Seeing each other as not colleagues, friends, comrades, but as competition, as threats, as people who are capable of undercutting our status, our value in life. And again, I want to emphasize, this is so old. It is so old. So those of us who are really, really arguing and organizing and not doing all that well, in order to be able to dismantle a culture of capitalism, which is certainly one of the more fascist systems of economic, political, social organizing in the history of the world, perhaps the most, it really, I think, it thwarts our ability to really think clearly about what we need to do. And in fact, it thwarts our ability to really work with each other as friends, colleagues, comrades who have things in common, which Boal would then call, the oppressed. And the oppressed have a common bond with other oppressed because they are oppressed. And because the struggle then is to eliminate that oppression. As a wonderful theater company in Brazil says, our focus is to eliminate oppression everywhere, which is a wonderful goal. I'm not sure how we do that. But anyway, these are sort of my thoughts for today that I want to offer up. The notion that it's not just a matter of fascism developing in civilization under some very, very difficult circumstances, but it's also the notion that these get established, these forms of fascism get established in a state to preserve privilege and to expand privilege. It is the state that emerges to do that, and the state has been here in multiple different ways for a long time. So that by the time we get to the 18th century, we have a modern state, the nation state, it's whatever you want to call it. but it's really highly developed at that time, highly developed, and oppressive and organized. I like the word manage because that's the word of the bourgeoisie now, to manage. And so they manage to get their wealth, and they manage other people. They don't. There's no more on the part of the bourgeoisie anymore to say they have a problem. They have a challenge. No more problems, just challenges, and that what's important is not to eliminate problems, but to manage them. What's important is not to eliminate COVID, but to manage it. So these are, I think, some real questions facing us. I look for dialogue. This will be up on YouTube. And by the way, I want to thank my wonderful wife, Margie. Here she is on this side, babe, just with the holes on there, right here. Hello. This is my attempt and our attempt to be able to put out some questions that might be useful in dialogue about how do we really truly move forward. How can we make the changes we want? Because there are a lot of forces arrayed against us. Perhaps if we know a little bit better what they are, maybe we can do better. So this is Doug's dialogue number 2. Next time I want to get into some other areas. Hope you'll find them interesting. Do contact me. I guess through YouTube. They can do it right on the page, can't they, Margie?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so if you have some thoughts you want to communicate to me, several people did from the last time, and I appreciated that.
It was beautiful.
So let's just keep this going. I really appreciate it. Let's stick together, and as I always say, onward. Thank you.
Thank you, Magic.
Was this wonderful?
Oh.
He says, I had to be with my dad for this because I know he was nervous. Oh, yes, you are. I should have introduced you, but it's good.
You'll be on the next one.
Oh, yeah. So it look okay?
Yeah, it looks really good. Oh, the first minute, though, the audio, because there was the water running.